Okay then everybody, welcome to another Leicester Lives podcast in association with our sponsor, Igloo Staffing Solutions. Don't forget, if you enjoyed this podcast, hit like, leave a comment, and do not forget to subscribe. And in front of me today, yet another interesting Leicester Life, because I've got Craig Glew in the studio. Craig, thanks very much for coming along and being a guest on the podcast. Absolute pleasure, mate, absolute pleasure. You know how it works, Craig. We like to roll it all the way back and talk about growing up in Leicester, so over to yourself.
Okay, so I was born in 1972. My parents were saving to buy a house, so for the first 3 months of my life I lived in New Parks with my mum's parents. Then after 3 months we moved to Belgrave for about 20 months, and then we moved to Minster Grange Estate where the Addy's pub is. And that for me is really where my memories begin. Had the most amazing childhood growing up around there. It was in the days in the 70s when, you know, there were a lot of open fields and forests and woods and dens we were going to build, and yeah, fantastic times. Action Man tanks is one I remember. Taking the tracks off Action Man tanks, sitting on them and going down Whitley Close Hill, racing on Action Man tanks. So yeah, that's one of my earliest memories.
And what schools did you go to, Craig?
So I went Alderman Richard Hallam, which is up the hill just off Anstey Lane. Went there nursery, infants and juniors. Loved school, absolutely loved school, till probably the last year at junior school when I started to dislike school a little bit. But yeah, school was fantastic, fantastic. We had a couple of skiing trips to Switzerland and Italy the year after, I think when I was 10 and 11, which were, you know, again, fantastic things to do, unheard of really back then. But yeah, school was fantastic, social life, just everybody was friends. You know, you'd go out on your bike, your BMX or your chopper or whatever bike you had. You knew where everyone was because everyone's bike could be outside that house. But yeah, it was amazing times growing up.
And a good family background?
Yeah, mum and dad really gave, you know, everything you could want as a child. They weren't well off, but we had everything that we needed, and they worked hard to give us the best childhood and upbringing, really. Yeah, it was fantastic.
And I think you're right there, Craig, because a few people have said, you know, of a similar age to ourselves, and older, nobody really had that much back in the day, did they? You know, everybody was pretty similar financial-wise.
Yeah, I mean, it was, you know, I think it took several years of my mum saving up to buy a car, to take her driving lessons, bought a little Mark II Escort. But yeah, I mean, it was, I think I was probably 8 or 9 before my mum could drive because they didn't have the money to afford a car. So yeah, it was, everybody had about the same really. So we all grew up. Money was not even mentioned. You know, we just all grew up with similar backgrounds and enjoyed life.
And what about senior school when you left junior?
So senior school, obviously left Dickie Hallam, went Beaumont Leys. That's where things changed somewhat. It was, I don't know, it was quite an experience going from what all you'd known at school to Beaumont Leys, where there was 3 or 4 schools that come together. I think there was 2,000 people at Beaumont Leys over the 5 years. So, you know, it was going to a huge school, lots of new friends. And I think that's where the mischievous sort of side of me came out. And I started to really dislike school by then. I knew I wanted to be a mechanic, and that's all I wanted to do was leave school. So yeah, I was a bit of a tearaway. Got on report and suspended a couple of times. And then when I was 13, my whole world fell apart. My dad worked at Cromwell Tools, and their head office was at Freeman's Common. And of course my dad didn't drive, but they moved the head office to Wigston. So for the first few months he was catching 2 buses there, 2 buses home. And I was told we're moving to Wigston. and it was like I could have been the other side of the world. It was, wow, this is just no. I'm not enjoying this. The thought of moving. So yeah, we moved to Wigston in '85. Went to Bushlow for 1 year because the schools were slightly different. Senior there, you did the first 3 years at one school and the last 2 years at Guthlaxton. But yeah, going from Beaumont Leys to a school where you had to wear a uniform and a tie and a blazer, and I couldn't have earrings or anything like that. It was very, very strange.
And the kids at Wigston, a lot different to the kids at Beaumont Leys?
Yeah, it was, everybody couldn't believe how much I swore. And for me, that was just the norm, everybody swore. And over the coming years, going back to Beaumont Leys, I noticed it too, but that was just the different in, the different schools. But yeah, I made some really, really good life friends at Bushlow and Wigston. Went up to Guthlaxton, didn't really go in the 5th year, just skived off because I knew what I wanted to do, and school wasn't that. So.
And where did the idea of becoming a mechanic come from, Craig?
I think I used to watch Formula One and rallying, the World Rally Championship, or what it was back then. The Group B era, 1985 and '86, that really set my heart on, And in later years, in the early to mid '90s, I actually built a rally car and went rallying as well. So that's I can tell you a bit more about that later.
So, what year do you leave school?
So I left in '88. My final day was a day to remember. I was leaving school. I was never going to go on to 6th form, and I got expelled. So
for what?
For skiving and being militant and disrespectful to the teachers, but that was what it was like back then.
Yeah. So just really them just having a parting shot at you, to be
Yeah,
fair.
just saying that's it, you're done.
And had you sorted out work to go to straight after school? Had you already sort of?
Yeah, I'd in those days it was YTS. I think it was the 2nd year of the youth training scheme, and to be a mechanic, as they were called then, from memory there was about 450 applications for 250 spaces. So you had to do aptitude tests, interviews, skill tests to have a chance to even get a job on the YTS as a trainee mechanic. But I was successful at that, and that's where my career started.
Here's a question for you, Craig. The YTS back in the day, it was looked upon, politically as, I don't know, not really an acceptable way, to be paying, what was it, 29 quid? 30,
No, it was £25.50.
25, and then it went up about £5 or so.
35 in the second year.
But when you look back retrospectively, it probably wasn't such a bad scheme after all, was it? For all the bad press it got.
Yeah, I mean, it did me proud. I stuck it out. I did the 2 years. I got took on. No, I did the 3 years. Sorry, I got took on after the 3rd year. Yeah, I mean, if it wasn't for that, I don't know what I'd have done.
Yeah. I mean, you do meet a lot of people who went through the YTS system and made a success of themselves after that.
Yeah, that's it.
I think a lot was just focused in on the 20 odd quid and the 30 odd quid.
Yeah,
wasn't
that's
it?
it. I mean, I had friends that were, labourers and earning £70-80 a week, and obviously there was a bit of jealousy there because they could afford things that I couldn't.
Yeah.
Time you paid your parents' board for, the week, you didn't have a lot of money left.
Yeah. So what sort of mechanics are you doing on this YTS then? Local garage or?
So this was at Vauxhall on Freeman's Common.
Right.
Worked there for a year because it was just general maintenance, servicing, repairs, learning, cars and how to fix them, how to diagnose faults, etc., which is quite simple now when you look back at compared with modern cars. And then because of my desire to go racing, I got friendly with a family that did go-kart racing. And I used to go go-kart racing with them. I ended up buying a go-kart from them, and they asked me to go and work for them at a little garage they had. But it was taking the piss out of me, really. It's just using me, probably doing 10 or 12-hour days for no extra money. And after 2 months, I thought I've had enough of this. So I then went to Bishop & Bishop in Wigston. And it was Rover back in the day.
Is that Wigston Magna, was it?
Wigston Magna, yeah, it's gone now. But yeah, so I worked there for probably 4 or 5 years, and then went back to Vauxhall on Freeman's Common, where I worked sort of ever since until 2001. Well, 99, I always had a dream of working for Ferrari. That was, you know, for most lads, for most people, dream cars, it's going to be a Lamborghini or a Ferrari, pretty much. And obviously with Great Paul being in Loughborough, it was the closest Ferrari dealership. In 99, there was a job in the Leicester Mercury for a technician there, and I applied, didn't hear a thing. And then in 2001, there was a job advertised again. So I applied, got an interview, had to go back to do a fault finding on a Maserati, which I passed and got offered the job. And that's where things really started to change. So yeah, 2001, there I was, at last, a mechanic at Ferrari.
And tell me the main difference between, I know some of the differences are going to be obvious, but some of the main differences between, say, working for Vauxhall and going up to work for Ferrari.
I think back in those days, Ferrari was still the dream. It was still really, you know, all about the history, and there was not a lot of technical support. There was not a lot of technical information available. So to diagnose the faults, you really just had to use your head, ask other technicians if they'd come across similar things. Whereas with Vauxhall, everything was on the computer, there was check sheets, there was information to help you diagnose. So it was like going back in time probably 10 or 15 years, but fantastic all the same.
Yeah, and a bit of glamour to working for
And
Ferrari.
a bit of glamour, yeah. I think...
I would just like to say a massive thank you to everybody who watches and supports this podcast, and in particular to our sponsors. Our main sponsor, Igloo Staffing Solutions, and our IT sponsor, Whiteski Digital. Don't forget, if you enjoyed this podcast, hit like, leave a comment, and do not forget to subscribe. Now let's crack on with the content.
I think it was day 3, we had an F40 in, which for me is the dream car. It always was until that point. And since then, I've driven so many different supercars and hypercars. It's still the car, and I was taken out as a passenger in it, and that was it. I was done. My dream had come true.
Yeah.
So
you start there. How soon before you sort of start progressing through the sort of system? Because, you know, I suppose you can just go there as a technician and just
stay there forever.
Yeah.
It was, I think, having come from a very well garage, a very well run dealership that was very organised. There was no organisation there. It was very, very poorly organised from an after sales point of view. And with the knowledge I had from working in the previous garages, I knew I could make a difference by moving off the shop floor, becoming a service advisor as it was then. That was the starting point. And adding processes and implementing changes so that we could actually improve customer service, quality of the repairs, productivity from the workshop as well. So that was in late 2002, I moved off the shop floor, became a service advisor, didn't really have a clue what I was doing, but again, self-taught, learned from others, and slowly progressed up from there.
What sort of customers did you have there as well, Craig?
There was a mix. I think, you know, a lot of people think people that can afford a Ferrari can be probably quite pompous, but they're not. You get, you know, it's the same, whatever the manufacturer of car you're looking after, the people are the same. You know, you get demanding people, you get people that are not demanding and they don't mind if it takes 2 weeks to fix the car because it's probably the 10th car they've got in the garage. You know, that's probably the slight difference. But yeah, I mean, there was a lot of footballers. It was quite nice because I used to look after a couple of the Leicester City team players' cars back in those days, the goalkeeper and a flamboyant blonde-haired.
I was going to say, Savage used to have a...
Yeah, Savage.
Ferrari,
He was a
yeah.
character.
Yeah.
He was a character. Some of the stories he told me that he shouldn't have been telling. Yeah, I won't repeat them, but yeah, some really, really funny stories.
I remember he used to drive that Ferrari around with... was it Maldini's shirt? He had the Italian shirt or
Yeah,
whatever.
I think so. Yeah,
that's
yeah.
right. Yeah.
He was an absolute character.
Yeah.
Great customer to deal with as well.
Yeah. I used to live near him actually. In Stowe, we used to live in Stoughton. He used to live in
did you?
Stoughton. Yeah.
Yeah.
Him and Darren Eady. He used to
Yeah.
see that Ferrari around a
Yeah,
bit.
no,
yeah.
he was a character.
Yeah. So you get on to being a service advisor, but
Yeah.
again, you're probably looking a couple of steps ahead. You
Yeah.
know. So what happens now?
So in 2006, I was the team manager. Loughborough, Great Paul, Loughborough and Sheffield closed, and we opened the big site in Nottingham, where it's still there today. 60-car showroom. And I was a team manager by then, so I had my own team of 5 technicians, doing all the service advising and workshop control, if you like, for those technicians. So managing my own team. But back in 2001, I was given the opportunity to go on a supercar tour around Europe. It was 25 cars. I was going to take a week's holiday, go as technical support in a tranny van with all my tools and things in. And the reason they wanted to take a technician was because all of these tours they'd done before, not all the cars finished. And it was the first time that all 25 cars made it to the end in St Moritz. I had a couple of major breakdowns, one being a Testarossa that had a leaking radiator, and I managed to fix that with 2 eggs at the side of a mountain in Switzerland. So, yeah, that was good. From there, the guy that ran the supercar club invited me back the following year, and this was going to be 90 cars from London to Monte Carlo. So again, I went and did that. Got to meet a lot of people through doing that. And I think in the 2002 one, we were at the Hotel de Paris at the gala dinner at the end of the event, and there was a young American guy in a Lamborghini Diablo, and his girlfriend was a daughter of a Russian billionaire. And towards the end of the dinner, he invited a few of us. He'd chartered a yacht to take him and his girlfriend around to Saint-Tropez for a few days. So the end of the event, we all walked down Monaco to the harbour, got to this yacht. There were 2 bouncers at the entrance to the jetty to get on. A row of shoes, take the shoes off, and we went on there. And it was there were some famous people on that. One in particular, very sort of well-known grandchild of somebody that recently passed away last year. And yeah, we partied hard on that yacht till early hours of the morning. So yeah, and I did those for the next 5 years, and the owner of the supercar club invited me to go and work for him. They had a magazine. Again, I was promised the earth. It was down in the Cotswolds, but it didn't I didn't get what he promised me I'd be getting. So in 2007, I went, after 6 months working there, went to work at Lamborghini and Bentley in Birmingham as a service advisor. Again, worked hard, changed my appearance a bit. I used to have bright blonde bleached hair, and so turned all that down a little bit, because I know I wanted to become an after sales manager, service manager at some point. And luckily enough, in 2010, a job came up at Ferrari in Solihull, and I got it. So yeah, my first after sales manager's role.
Yeah. So how does it feel, Craig, coming from Beaumont Leys School to suddenly being thrust into, what you might say is fairly sort of influential society?
It's hard to describe. At the end of the day, cars to me, even though I've worked with these amazing cars for so long, are still nuts and bolts and wires. But the feeling to know that, I've come from a school like Beaumont Leys, where really all of us lads of that era, none of us were ever going to, you know, the teachers, none of you are ever going to do anything with your lives. So to come from that to where, you know, I've got to, yeah, it's certainly an achievement. Feel very proud.
And ever any hint of imposter syndrome? Because, you know, that is spoken about a lot these days, you know, where, you know, whether it's what I do for a living in business, what you do for a living, you know, that sometimes you feel, I shouldn't really be here, you know, why am I? You
do have to pinch yourself sometimes. You know, when you're going out and you're driving a Ferrari or an F50 or, you know, a £15 million classic Ferrari, and you actually have to just think to yourself, you know, I'm driving something that nobody, you know, not many people in the world will ever get the chance to do, and I'm getting paid to do it. It's quite a phenomenal experience, and in the back of your mind, you always know that you're very lucky, very lucky.
So you get the role at Solihull.
Yeah.
But again, you're probably looking a couple of steps ahead again.
Yeah. Well, I was asked to actually go move from Solly. It was all part of the same dealer group, and go and be the after sales manager at Grey Paul in Nottingham, which was the big one. And that was again, you know, learning more things, implementing, you know, changes that I would normally implement, improving the business, improving the customer experience, etc. And the people that work there, you know, I'm a big believer that, you know, you might not be liked as a manager, but as long as you've got the respect, your team will work for you. You know, I always give as much as I get. You know, you won't not see me cleaning the toilet or repairing a toilet seat if it's broken, or sweeping the car park. You know, I don't expect that if it's something I won't do, then my team shouldn't be doing it either.
And just thinking about the timeline, what sort of age are you when you get this role at Solihull?
So at Solihull, I would have been 38, so quite late probably to become a service manager. But I did spend so long on the shop floor. A lot of people take the quicker route sooner. So yeah, 38.
And what's going on home-wise at this particular time?
So at that time, been married, 2 children, Thomas and Ashley. Split up with the first wife, got with the second wife, got divorced, got married. That didn't last long, ended up getting divorced quite quickly. Also had my third child then, Taylor. But it was, lived with my parents for 3 years, from 2007 till 2009. And then bought a flat in Stony Stanton. But yeah, children, it was quite difficult. I'd have all 3 children every other weekend, or on a Sunday. Family life was like a lot of family lives nowadays. Marriages don't tend to last that long. The first one was definitely my fault while it broke up. But you know, everything happens for a reason. I'm a big believer of that.
And would you put any of the marriage breakdowns sort of in correlation with the job, or were they just sort of independent I think events?
I mean, again, being a mechanic, most evenings, most weekends, I'd be fixing cars, friends, families, cars. So you do tend to not be in the house that often. So I can imagine that, you know, from doing what I did and fixing cars, you know, out of work, it would definitely put a strain on any relationship.
Sure.
Plus, I like to go out, you know, at least once a week with the lads on the beer.
Yeah.
Down the Royal Oak, as it was back then.
So you're at Solihull, you're in that particular role, you know, the managerial role, but you get given some more opportunity.
Yeah, so I moved to Nottingham, like I say, did a couple of years at Nottingham, and a short stint at Bentley and Lamborghini in Leicester. And then I got the opportunity to go and work in India. A few of my friends from the group that I worked for from around the UK had gone to work in Hong Kong. So that was sort of a dream. I was sort of single at this point. Well, I'd just got with Rachel, who I'm engaged to now. But the opportunity came to go to India, and
whereabouts in India?
it was in Gurgaon, which is New Delhi.
Right.
It was working with Audi, but I'd almost got a job in Kuwait before India, and the reason I didn't get the job is because I had no international experience. I think for any international company employing an expat from the UK, they're investing a lot of money, and from what I've now learned is a lot of people do 3 to 6 months, not for me, and leave. If you've already got the international experience, you're more likely to get a job. So India came up, and it was like, it's not what I would have chosen, but it was an opportunity to get the international experience, and I took it and absolutely loved it. India, for me, I'd still be there now. If the company hadn't closed down for fraud, I'd still be there now, I'm sure.
Fantastic country.
Just wonderful.
And I've got to ask you, Craig, did you do much driving over there? Because I've spent quite a bit of time in India myself, and I wouldn't get behind the wheel.
I did no driving over there whatsoever. I was quite fortunate because working in India at management level, I had a driver and a car, so I'd just ring or message my driver and he'd come and pick me up wherever I was. But yeah, you've seen some sights on the roads there.
Don't you just?
Four lanes of traffic going that way, with seven rows of traffic and 3 rows coming this way, and then cars and people walking across the road.
Yeah. It always amazes me in India. There's not more accidents. I mean, it's, the things they could do with an inch here and an inch there,
it's like, every car is battered.
Yeah.
But you don't see that many accidents, and you like you say, you wonder, how can this be?
Yeah. What were the high points of India, would you say, Craig?
I think it was probably the highest point was when Rachel came over for a week. I found a bar that was quite a Western bar, and for India it was quite expensive, but compared to the UK, it was peanuts to get a beer. And it was a microbrewery, so they brewed their own beer. You could buy Kingfisher and other bottled beers, but they did food from all around the world. So for somebody that loves hot curries, that's something you don't really get in India. You can't get vindaloos and falls and those sort of heat. But I got very friendly with a lot of people in there, and I made some live friends as well. And then Rachel come over, and I took some time off work, and drove us down to Agra, and we had a night in a hotel, and then the following day, guided tour of the Taj Mahal. And again, that's, wow, what a place to go and see. You can see why it's one of the 7 man-made wonders of the world. It's just phenomenal. So that was probably the highlight of everything. But the people, again, it's, brilliant people.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
I think, you're never stuck for some advice, are you, when you're in India?
No, no. I think going from a team of probably 17, 18 people to a team of 272 people, it just shows you the difference. The cost of labour out there is nothing. And if somebody leaves, there'll be another 1,000 people waiting to take that job. So yeah, it was a massive, massive team of people.
And what about the low points of India? I suppose you just started this relationship with Rachel, but you've started it, and then you're off on another continent. So that must have been quite difficult.
It was difficult. I mean, I came home. I think at the Easter. Rachel came out in the June, and she was planning to come back out in the October. Flights were booked. My parents were coming out to see me, and then in September, the business got closed down. The owners had committed huge fraud, and that was the end of that. So Jitu, my driver, took me to the Open Tap, the bar I used to go to. I didn't tell him I was going to be leaving. Messaging Rachel, desperately trying to book a flight home for the following day. Finally, Rachel managed to book a flight for me, and told Jitu when he dropped me off that night, you need to pick me up earlier tomorrow, but I'm going to the airport. So anything in my apartment that is, I'm not taking with me, you can have. So he was upset, but he was over the moon with that. So yeah, flight back from India, Rachel picked me up, all excited, I was all excited, and on the way back up from Heathrow, I got a phone call on Messenger from a friend of mine that then was working in Taiwan, and he said, can you remember a guy called Mike? I said, yeah, I remember Mike. He said, he'll be giving you a call in the next hour. He wants to know if you're interested in going to Hong Kong. So there's me thinking, wow, I like the sound of that. And Rachel's got a miserable face. He was like, oh, he's going again. So yeah, about 2 weeks after I got back, flew out to Hong Kong for 5 days. Had an interview with the owner, which I thought went very well. Mike showed me all the sights of Hong Kong, which was, it was like going as a tourist. So I actually got to do a bit of sightseeing, and then came home, excuse me, and had to wait about 2 weeks to confirm that, because the owner had gone on holiday after he'd interviewed me, to confirm that yes, I'd got the job. And then I think it was 3 or 4 days later, off I went again, saying goodbye to Rachel again.
And how long since Hong Kong had gone back under Chinese rule at that particular time, Craig?
So that would have been 21 years after the change. 97, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So yeah, I went there in back end of 2018.
Yeah. So you're starting to see possibly some of the old sort of empire, and then the...
Yeah, I think for me, in the five and a bit years I was there, I noticed a lot of old buildings that were probably 7 or 8 stories being knocked down and being replaced by huge skyscrapers.
Yeah.
Not a lot of people realise that actually in Hong Kong and the new territories which are on the mainland, there's only, I think it's 35% of the landmass is allowed to be built on. The rest is all natural. Because everyone thinks it's just a concrete jungle. But actually it isn't. It is in lots of parts, but yeah, it was quite a lot of changes. There's still a lot of the old colonial buildings, the old courthouse and the police yard and the prison. There's a lot of nice bars around there.
Sure.
So yeah, there's some wonderful places to go in Hong Kong.
Yeah. What was the main differences between India and Hong Kong when you get over there?
I think very similar in the language. In India, a lot of the people couldn't speak English. Being from Leicester, you don't realise you've got an accent. If you're from Liverpool or Newcastle, people know those accents. But over there, people couldn't understand me, both in Hong Kong and India. So I really had to slow my speech down and speak very clearly. But culturally, very different. Very different. Yeah, I mean, both places I loved, absolutely loved.
Yeah. And what sort of clientele were driving these motors over in Hong Kong?
I mean, you go into another level now.
Yeah.
I mean, some of the richest people in the world.
That's what I'm thinking.
Are there, and some of the car collections were just phenomenal.
Yeah.
We had customers with 200, 300, 400 cars in their collection. You name a car, they'd have 1, 2, 3 or 4 of them.
Sure.
So yeah, but again, I got quite close to some of the big customers. Almost, I mean, you say friends, but I'd go out for lunch with them, go out for beers with them sometimes, and they're all people at the end of the day. It doesn't matter what money we've got, we're all people.
Absolutely.
We've all got stories to tell.
So, does Rachel stay in England at this time, or does she come over?
Yeah, Rachel stayed in England. Her 2 daughters, Millie and Chloe, were still teenagers. They weren't adults yet. And obviously at school, Millie started work. So, we had no choice. I had to go on my own. And the first year was fantastic. I think I'd been there 4 weeks and Rachel came out I'd been there 2 months, sorry. Rachel came out for a week. About 3 months later, I came home for a couple of weeks. Rachel came out again. I think she visited in the first year 3 times, and I came home 3 times. So it was fantastic. Came home at Christmas in 2019. By then, my youngest son Taylor, him and his mum had moved to South Africa. So I'd been to South Africa probably 3 times in previous years, but I took my father and my eldest son Tom to South Africa for a week to see Taylor and go to some game reserves and things. Got back, 2 days later, flew back to Hong Kong, and 2 days after, the next day, we were flying to Shanghai for a Ferrari meeting. And we'd sort of seen and heard about this new disease that was going to kill everybody. And we got to the airport and we had to wear masks for the first time. It was quite strange. Had to wear masks on the plane. Got to Shanghai. Again, everywhere you had to wear masks. But we didn't really understand, I certainly didn't understand what it was all about. I think we had 2 or 3 days in Shanghai, flew back to Hong Kong, and then it really started to hit home that there's this COVID thing, this disease. It's like, and China, Hong Kong people, you know, quite used to seeing them wear masks, because I think they had bird flu and SARS or you know previous sort of diseases that you know can be very harmful. But for me, it was quite alien having to wear a mask all the time.
Definitely.
You know, and you go out onto the street, you have to wear a mask. If you're not wearing a mask during those times, you'd get fined on the spot, $5,000.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you wore a mask.
Yeah. So, what sort of draconian measures were put on Hong Kong during the COVID pandemic?
I think to start with, it was probably the same as the UK was when it first came about. It was masks, social distancing came in, but they're very good with the technology. They're very quick. There was an app launched, so you obviously had to have your injections. If you wanted to leave Hong Kong and come home, you had to have your injections to get back into Hong Kong. So I think I had the first 2 jabs, and there was an app that had your vaccination record on it. And during the height of COVID, if you wanted to go to Marks and Spencer's to get your groceries that week, unless you had the right colour QR code on your app, you weren't allowed into the supermarkets.
Crazy. And would you say the people were fairly abiding by these regulations?
Very.
Because, you know, in the United Kingdom, and I'll include myself in this, you know, probably wasn't the best at conforming to a lot of the COVID measures.
No.
For a variety of reasons. Whereas there's more of a culture in that sort of society as
I mean,
you do what you're told.
Everybody abides. You don't see anyone without the masks. I mean, it got silly. You go to the MTR, which is the equivalent of the Tube in London, the Underground, and there'd be people literally with hazmat suits on. Remember when you were a kid and you went swimming, you had the sort of foam tubes that you used to practice swimming with, and they'd have like 1 metre these tubes sticking out all around them, so people couldn't get close to them, and they'd have face visors on, and it was unbelievable. Unbelievable.
And you know, we were sort of led to believe at the time, you know, that it originated from China. Did people of sort of Chinese heritage believe that it came from China, or was it?
I don't know.
I think narrative.
Because of their culture, they don't really speak out that much. They choose when they want to speak what they're really thinking. So again, it's compliance. A lot of people just comply with what is the norm, what the government expect and instruct is they follow.
Yeah. And if anybody had tried to sort of protest or whatever, what would have been the consequences?
Well, yeah, I mean, you'd be locked up straight away. I think that's the thing, as time went on in Hong Kong, you knew if you did anything naughty, you know, you'd been for a few beers and you was having a pee up the alleyway and the coppers saw you, you'd probably have a good chance you'd be nicked and in jail.
Yeah.
So you just had to be very, very careful.
Very, very careful.
Yeah.
And how did you find it? Because I mean, it's no matter what job it is, it's difficult sometimes to be existing in a foreign country, and then you're in a foreign country and you're put under all this
Yeah, on my own as well.
On your own, you're put under all this pressure. So how's that affecting you, would you say, Craig?
I mean, I think looking back now I've come back, mentally it was very, very challenging. So the first probably 18 months, every Friday night, there's a group of us that went out to Wan Chai, beer, curry, go to one of the clubs with the bands on. As the restrictions started to get more and more strict, the bars and restaurants were closed. So having the working all week, the Friday night, the old RV, the same pet thing, work all week and spend it all on a Friday night, that was gone. And you couldn't really go out on a weekend because there was nowhere open. So, mentally it got very, very difficult.
Yeah.
Very difficult.
Thinking about coming home at that time?
Yes. Yeah, it was something that mentally was so challenging that it's time to come home. Financially, I need to stay a bit longer. And as it got more strict and they stopped all the flights from the UK and America, so nobody could come and visit. During the 3 big years of COVID, I came home once a year. The first year I had 2 weeks home and I had to do a week quarantine in a hotel in Hong Kong. The second year it was 3 weeks home and 2 weeks quarantine. The third year they announced that flights from the UK were allowed again. So I booked a last minute flight, came home for 3 weeks. On day 2 of being home in the UK, Hong Kong government banned all the flights from the UK again. So I was stuck. I was stuck back home. I had my computer so I could work. But it was, how can I get back to Hong Kong? I came back June the 1st, I think it was. I ended up spending 6 weeks back in Stony Stanton at home. And then we found a route that we could go through Phuket on their sandbox scheme. So I had 21 nights in Phuket, a night in Bangkok, and then 3 weeks quarantine in a hotel room in Hong Kong. So 12 weeks, 12 weeks out of the office. It was horrendous. That was stir crazy being in a room for 3 weeks.
I was going to say, what were these quarantine hotels like? I suppose.
Well, you had to pay for them yourself, and you had to book them. And Hong Kong's hotels in Hong Kong could be very expensive, and you have to be quick. So for me, it was pick the cheaper end of the scale. But for those 3 weeks, I think it was about 900 quid. But it was literally a room not much bigger than this with velvet wallpaper peeling off, and you just got served slop. There was a knock at your door. You'd go out and there'd be a bag of slop there for you to eat. So it was horrible.
And again, taxing on your mental health, I would imagine.
That was very difficult. And with the time difference from Hong Kong to the UK, if you wanted to speak to Rachel or the kids or my parents or friends, you obviously had the time difference. So when everyone was sort of finishing work, I was fast asleep. So it's tough. A lot of people don't realise how tough it can be.
And how was working, if that makes sense, during the pandemic? Because if there's all these sort of restrictions, I mean, you can't just, or the staff at the garage can't be going about their normal business in the way they normally would.
It was, I mean, the work, we were quite fortunate. We didn't have many days where the business was closed. We were open and we grew the business during COVID more than you'd ever believe. The profits, the amount of cars we seen went up. A lot of people in Hong Kong's quite claustrophobic. And I think no more than 3 months you need to get out, even if it's just for a weekend. And Hong Kong people love travelling. And they're in the middle of Asia. They can go to anywhere within a few hours. They couldn't travel, so they were spending money on the cars. So for us, business just boomed. It was great. It was great.
So when does it start to ease off a little bit?
So I came home, I think it was October 22, got back, and then they really started to release the restrictions, and Rachel could come out and visit again, which she did about 3 or 4 weeks after. Still had to wear masks, you still had to have the QR code to get into certain places, bars and restaurants mainly. And then probably 6-8 weeks after that, so the start of 23, all the restrictions were gone.
And would you say, having an app like that which is tracking, I mean, I know mobile phones track us anyway.
Yeah.
But having an app like that, do you think there was a certain amount of governmental control over its citizens as well?
Yeah, yeah, most definitely. Part of the quarantine in the hotel rooms, you had to download another app for the quarantine, and you had to once a day walk around all the four corners of your room,
Right.
so they could track that your phone was still in the room and you were still in there, basically.
Yeah. It is, like I said, it's a whole podcast in itself, really.
Yeah.
About, but I mean, it's from a human sort of liberty, freedom, rights. It's an absolute disaster, isn't it? People go along with this. Well, people had no choice not to where you were. But even in this country, people having a QR code to go into Weatherspoons,
I know,
and voluntarily doing it. It's
mad.
Absolutely crazy.
And you'd land at the airport. You'd probably be at the airport for 6, 7, 8 hours because you had to have a COVID test when you landed, before you flew and when you landed. It's only when you got a negative were you allowed to go to the hotel, and you were herded like cattle. And you got to the hotel, you got off the minibus, and they sprayed you and all your suitcases with whatever the liquid we're using. Come out in the hazmats like you were, an alien. Yeah, it's quite strange.
So did that put you off Hong Kong as a place, or did you just sort of take it as the world had lost its head? So,
I think like everybody,
yeah.
we look back now and we think, why did this happen? Why did everybody do, what we did? Because yes, it probably would have reduced people dying. I get that. But really, with flu and all the other natural things around, more people die of flu every year than probably will ever die of COVID.
Well, that's it. We have businesses in healthcare, and I can talk about rates of flu, bad flu, particularly about 5 or 6 years ago. There were record numbers of people in this country who do it, and nobody even knew about that.
No.
I only knew about that through work.
That's it.
Percentage-wise, there was more people died of that than they did of COVID. It's absolutely crazy. So the restrictions ease.
Yeah.
You go back to Hong Kong.
Yeah.
Planning to stay at this time?
Yeah, I mean, by then I'd become a granddad. Michael, my grandson, he'll be 3 in May, and being away, and I'd probably during my last sort of 18 months, 2 years in Hong Kong, I got to see him probably 4 or 5 times, and obviously, Rachel and my parents not getting any younger, my kids growing up. It was time to come home, I think. It was now, I had to financially pick a time where I could come home, because we bought a house a couple of years ago, so I had I've still got a big expat mortgage on that. The rates you pay as an expat are far more than you'd pay as a UK resident. So I had to plan it so that when I came back, I can remortgage the end of April, that financially I've got quite a few quid to pay off the mortgage, and actually it'll be quite affordable then. So the time came. I came back in October last year, and it was again just at the right time. One of my best friends, Mark Stanley, his dad Jim, who I'd known since I was probably this big, passed away. So it was fortunate for me that I was back at the time for the funeral. That was the game changer, really. That was right, now it's time to come home. So, and I got an email from a job agency saying, we've got a possible job for you in Leicester. And it was like, this is just all sort of coming together that, so I went for the interview and got that job, but I had to give 90 days notice in Hong Kong. So back to Hong Kong for another 3 months, and then towards the end of January this year, home for good, saying goodbye to Hong Kong, all my friends.
Heavy heart?
Yeah. I mean, I do miss it. If things could be different and it wasn't 6,000 miles away, I'd have stayed for many more years. And it's probably now the time where Rachel could actually come over and be with me out there. Her daughters have now moved out, got their own places. So it would be probably the right time for us both to go somewhere. But no, it's good to be home.
Yeah.
Good to be home.
And just going back to being abroad, best car you drove?
F40. Without,
F40,
yeah, that's the one. I mean, I've driven pretty much you name it. I mean, back in 2006 with the Supercar Club, we went to the Bugatti factory with, I think it was 12 of their high-end clients to drive the Veyron. Again, I went as technical support, not thinking I'm going to get a chance to drive one. And on day 2, they said, right, it's your turn, Craig, off you go. It's like, wow. And there I was, you know, driving a Bugatti Veyron.
Yeah.
So, yeah, driving all of these cars, still for me, the F40 is the one.
Yeah.
They're all special in their own right, but that's the one. That's the one to have.
Most famous customer?
Can't really name names, or can I?
You can if you want to.
Yeah. So, the most famous customer I've spoke to was Rod Stewart. We used to look after his cars. And quite a sort of famous story among the people that you know worked at the place. We looked after his cars, and his Enzo used to come in with Penny Lancaster's G-string hanging from the rearview mirror, and specially made red cushions so he could sit higher and see over the steering wheel. So yeah, lots of famous customers over the years. But I think Rod Stewart, remembering my dad playing his Rod Stewart records back in the 70s, for me that's the most famous one.
Good bloke, was he?
Yeah, proper down to earth.
Yeah, I can imagine that.
Really down to earth. And I think the lorry drivers, when they used to go down and collect his cars, he used to invite him in his kitchen for a cup of tea, and yeah, just a normal bloke.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah.
Really can. What about, without naming names, most obnoxious customer? You must have come across a few in your time.
Couple of footballers, young footballers that were at the time very, very highly paid, and they were just absolute wankers.
Yeah.
You know, you just the C word is the word you'd use.
Yeah.
You know, you wouldn't want to help them.
Yeah.
But you had to, because obviously they were paying you to do a job on the car.
Yeah. So what does the future hold in store for you now, Craig? Now you're back.
I think certainly a good few years in Leicester. Maybe something else abroad in the future. But I don't know. Settle down, enjoy my time. I can relax now. That's good. Spend time with my grandson and my children. And yeah.
But missing a bit of that weather, I'd imagine.
Yeah, the weather is certainly something. I think every day since I've been back, it's literally been freezing. Putting the central heating on, and Rachel's like, "What you put the heating on for? You don't need it on." Yeah, I do. It's cold.
What sort of message would you send out to people who are in a similar position to you when you were young? Because, like you said, you know, you're in this, super school of 2,000 kids in Beaumont Leys.
Yeah.
And you're not really enjoying life too much at school, and you can't. And then you fast forward sort of 20, 30 years, and you know you're mixing with your Rod Stewarts, and you.
I think for anyone really, if you know what you want to do, if you've got that dream, follow it. Do what you need to do to achieve your dream. Never say no. Yeah, I think if you put your mind to it, anybody can do anything. And that's, you know, coming from the school years that I had, that certainly rings true. Put your heart and soul into what you want to do and you'll achieve it.
Yeah. Do you think there's a problem in schools with sometimes, you know, almost like teachers being very negative about the chances of their students, you know, if they don't sort of conform to straight A students or A star or whatever they call them these days, you know, that, you know, you're never going to make anything of your life unless you follow that traditional pattern.
I think back in my day that was certainly true. You know, there was probably in a school year of, I don't know, 400, 500 kids, there was probably only a couple of handfuls of kids that really were going to go on and do something, you know, with the lives, university, etc. Nowadays, I think it's the opposite. I think there's more kids have got the opportunity to go and do that, but the world's changed. Children are changed now. You know, it's all just phones, games consoles. There's no interest in sort of physical labour anymore. So, you know, the motor trade's suffering badly with it. Nobody really coming into the trade.
Is that right?
Yeah, a lot of people are left. Salaries are rising because we need to pay more to get people.
Yeah.
So
Interesting, I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's a really, really tough trade at the minute to employ.
And if you were to work abroad again, anywhere take your fancy in particular?
If Matt Morgan watches this, he'll be saying Bahrain. Bahrain is somewhere that, you know, I have been offered roles out there. But for me, I think if I was going to go somewhere now, I'd choose probably America, somewhere in America. Never been to America, so I think that's the big dream really, if I was going to do it again.
Yeah, no, you want to get over there.
Definitely give that one a go.
Yeah, 100%. Well, I'll tell you what, Craig, really enjoyed having you in today.
Yeah, thank you for
Got some
having me.
great stories, and you know, you live quite a life really, like you said, you know, going from relatively humble
beginnings.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, it's
as I was known as Hong Kong Louis.
Craig, it's been an absolute pleasure, mate.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for your time, and I'll see you soon.
Brilliant, thank you.
Great stuff.